Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff Ream. I am here in my office to bring to you some information about how you can make college and the world of college most financially accessible for every family. And so today I'm going to talk through part one of a two-component workshop. This first component is really kind of going through the broad overview of what is financial aid, what pots and pools of money do we have available to us, how do we interpret things like financial aid award letters, and also how do we just understand exactly what we're going to be on the hook for and how to make a decent decision about what the costs of colleges look like. And so we are going to break down a couple key parts of the process, highlight some key dates, highlight some information that you're going to want to know about how your senior and your family is going to be applying to college this fall and in the spring. And so I'm going to be switching back and forth between screens, and just a couple caveats as we kind of get into this content. Kind of like very similar to when we're talking about general college advising. A lot of this information is kind of top level, surface level, big picture. In the world of college applications, in the world of financial aid advising, it's very difficult to give a broad kind of overview to a large different people in different audiences. And so financial aid, what you'll find, is very personal. So it's very personal to your own family circumstances. And so both family size, income, things like that, all really have heavy factors into how financial aid is awarded and how financial aid is evaluated by the government and schools. And so today I hope to kind of bring that with you, bring that to you, and we can kind of walk through some of the bigger picture items. The next session, which will be a little bit later in October, about 2 weeks from now or so, is something that I will actually break down the major financial aid application and walk us through step by step so you actually understand kind of how to submit the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We will hit on a couple other applications and pieces of information you need to be aware of. After this live recording, I will put a link to the slide deck, which you'll see in just a second. And so if you see me kind of messing around, I got a couple different computers going on that I'll kind of use to help make sure that what you're seeing on the screen makes the most sense and you can kind of follow along as we have the conversation today. So again, just remember that it is complicated. We're going to talk through a lot of different things. And so, you know, this Financial Aid 101 session really has a focus on helping you understand the process. And I say you, when I say you, it really means both the student and the family. All right. You guys both have skin in the game in relation to this. All right. So we kind of talked through a little bit of the agenda. And so we'll cover some of what are some key terms, what are some key pieces of information that you need to know, talk about what some of the different federal and California state level programs are that are out there that will help make financial aid available to our students. A few tips on actually filling out the FAFSA, and I'll give you a couple kind of time sensitive things that you might want to think about doing before we even get to that walkthrough a little bit later in October. And then some additional resources, and we'll actually kind of jump to the end of the process, and I'll help you take a quick look at so what does all this work kind of return for students. And along the way, I'll give you some tips and advice that I've seen over the last 10 years and that students have seen, and just kind of like there's some general assumptions out there in the world of financial aid and in thinking about this idea of the cost of college that really we have to kind of like think a little bit more critically about. So just hang in there. This will be complicated. Financial aid, it's kind of like taxes. It's kind of boring. So hang in there with me. We'll try to keep this short-ish and to the point. So let's get going though. So let's talk about some basic information of what financial aid actually is. So on the screen, you know, in its most rudimentary terms, financial aid helps pay for college. So this is money that somebody else, okay, will give to you, and we'll break down who those people might be. Okay, a couple examples of what financial aid could look like for families and students. So kind of going from best to not necessarily not best, but things that we'd love to see first versus the things that you know, can still help paved the way to make college a reality for families. So the first two on this list that you see on the screen, grants and scholarships, those are the two financial aid things that everybody wants to see. Okay, and why is that? Because grants and scholarships generally do not have to be paid back. I say generally because they might come with stipulations. Okay, so you're not going to pay back a grant, you're not going to pay back a scholarship, but you might have to follow through on certain things. So you might have to actually, keep a certain grade point average, or follow through and send a thank you letter every year, or proof of enrollment, or things like that. But generally speaking, grants and scholarships are free money. So we love grants and scholarships, and there's different ways that those will come. We'll touch on that in a little bit. The third one on the list is loans, and this is probably the one that people hate seeing the most. So loans are funds that have to be back, and we'll break down some information about what loans look like, what are some realities in the world of loans in college, and then what are some things just to be cautious with. And the last one on there is work-study programs, and that's kind of like, think of it like a job that will help you offset the cost of college. Usually these work-study programs are built in such a way that students have, say, a job on campus. My wife, I know, worked in the study abroad office, and it sounded like a really great opportunity while she was in college. But things like being the front desk person in your dorm, being a campus advisor, a tour guide, things like that are all very typical work-study programs that pays you often more than a minimum wage, but also is very flexible. So you can go get a job out in the community that potentially you could work and maybe make more money, if you're being a server or something like that. But on the same note, the thing that you lose is the flexibility. These work-study programs generally are very flexible with your class and study schedule. And so you might not have, say, an 8-hour shift or a 6-hour shift. You might work for an hour in the morning, an hour at lunchtime, and then maybe 2 or 3 hours in the evenings or something like that, or just on the weekends. Or they have a very kind of like fluid scheduling system usually. And so you see that will be definitely beneficial for our students that are taking classes and are in college. Now, let's talk a little about kind of like where some of this money is going to actually come from. So what you can see on the screen is there's 6 different dots, okay, that all make up the college fund. And there's, I would say, probably 3 primary places that it actually comes from, okay? The first one is this top green dot, or like pea green dot, the federal government, okay? And so that's kind of the first filter that we send our information through. The federal government has a form. It's called the FAFSA. We'll get into that also a little bit later. The FAFSA is an acronym. It stands for the free, keyword, free, never pay money to fill out the FAFSA, free application, so FA, for F, student S aid. So FAFSA, FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. All right, the government loves their acronyms. But basically, this is a form that takes information about your family and their finances and plugs it into a big giant equation that spits out an end number, which we'll break down in a second, too, called the EFC, expected family contribution. Okay, and so that number, that's really all that application does, but it's a very pivotal piece of information that your schools need to actually create a financial aid package. All right, so the state actually takes that information as well and processes it. Like in California, we have something called the Cal Grant program. Okay, and so they will actually process that and be able to qualify you for additional aid outside of just, say, the federal government aid that you'll see. So that's that next green dot going clockwise around. So about 4 o'clock, we see the colleges and universities. So colleges and universities are probably the third primary place where you're going to get your financial aid. Okay, it's not actually the governments generally that are actually providing loans or grants or scholarships. It's usually the government funds in some ways and in some circumstances that are being used and provided by the college itself. So your actual financial aid package and actual financial aid award and the money is actually delivered by the college itself. So you're not really interfacing with the government, you're interfacing with the university. And so those are going to be key places, but they will also be places that will award things like merit aid. They'll set up your work study and things like that. So those are probably your biggest 3, federal, state, and college and universities. The one that's not on here that I like to add is if you're watching this as a parent, you. And even the student potentially. So you actually have a lot of opportunity and a lot of responsibility to be part of this equation. And so this FAFSA will take into account several different factors that will determine how much the cost of college will look. All right. And so the other pieces around the rest of this circle, the private foundations, that's going to be scholarship money. We'll touch briefly on that, but generally speaking, our local financial aid opportunities are our most fruitful. Students make about $500,000 to $600,000 a year in just local in our Tahoe, Truckee region financial aid. So generally speaking, it's a very fruitful end of year process when students do fill out the application. I don't want you to panic about those opportunities, because those won't, that local opportunity that will be probably the most beneficial of time, invested in this process is not going to be available till probably early February. All right, so I get a lot of questions early on, where's the scholarships? Where's the scholarships? And generally speaking, you can do all those giant, large scholarship applications, the FastWebs and the McDonald's scholarship and that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, the most common ones that people are actually going to receive, meaning your time and energy is well spent, are our local and regional ones. All right, and so those will typically come out December, January, and that big local scholarship application, which we will seniors, kind of force down your throat a little bit, will come out usually right after our first semester ends at the end of January. Okay, but you will definitely, I guarantee you, parents and students, if you're at school, you will know about it. It will take more work to not submit the application than to actually submit it. Okay. Employers and private companies. So if your family works for a particular company, sometimes they have funds to maybe help dependents go to college. That's something always to explore and find out if there's any scholarship opportunities because you have a natural in. And then professional and service organizations like a Rotary and things like that. Up here, Rotary is also part of that kind of local scholarship application. And so students will definitely be considered for many of those. But if you're involved in some other service organization or club or a church or things like that, those are also excellent ways to find typically smaller sources of financial aid. Okay, so it kind of typically starts larger and goes smaller around the circle. We talked a little bit about the basic types of aid with grants, loans, and such, but it breaks down even further. So there's several types of grants and scholarship opportunities, as well as several types of loans. Okay, so at the top you see there's something called a merit-based scholarship. That merit word means that you're bringing something to the table. All right, so you are bringing something that normally they wouldn't be able to get. So that might be great grades. Maybe you took an SAT and maybe they're considering that. Maybe you play an instrument or play a sport or have some other skill that you're able to bring to the table. So something that they like, that they want to reward you for bringing to their university. So merit-based scholarships are in that. And most typically you're going to see that at private institutions. All right, so like in California, you're not going to really see any merit-based aid at our public institutions, okay, unless you're a heavily recruited athlete, so or some other kind of recruited person, say musician or something like that. But generally speaking, across the board, most students are not going to see merit-based scholarships at a CSU or a UC. All right, the next kind of category is need-based. All right, and so you'll have need-based scholarships, but you also have need-based grants, both free money. So need actually takes into account your ability to pay for school, your ability to pay for college, and what your family income looks like. And so your qualifications for these need-based awards depends on those factors. And so that's where it definitely gets super specific in terms of family situation. And you want to make sure you understand that. But the best way to actually know that is completing the FAFSA. And just to go back to those merit-based scholarships and our scholarship application locally and things like that, many of them, because a lot of people say, well, we won't qualify for the need-based aid, so we're not submitting the FAFSA. And I think that's a big mistake. I think every single student, I don't care how rich or not rich you are, should complete the FAFSA or the California Dream Act, which we'll talk briefly on later too. This is going to mainly focus on the FAFSA because that's our biggest one, but I'll touch on that. Everybody should complete that application as a senior, okay? Because even if you're not going to qualify for the need-based grants, you might qualify for potentially loans that you might need that are subsidized or things like that, as well as merit-based financial aid usually uses information from the FAFSA. Okay, so you'd be potentially throwing away a lot of money if you don't complete part of this process. All right. Talked about parent loans, things like that. So we'll take a look at the different types on another slide. And then we'll talk about savings plans and things like that. And a lot of that will come up a little bit more in part 2 when we look at things like what goes on and into the FAFSA calculations and stuff like that. So who can get financial aid? Okay, so there are some rules and regulations, just like with anything. And so because a lot of this federal aid and state aid is funded through taxpayer dollars, they do have some stipulations. Okay, and there is some slight differences between both federal and state aid and who can qualify. So I'll try to break that down. So in general, when we're looking at the broader picture of the FAFSA itself, you have to be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. Okay, DACA will not apply in this circumstance. Okay, so and then we're talking about the student. Okay, I think I cover this in the future, but this is not referring to family. This is not referring to parents or guardians. Okay, this is when we say that this person must be a U.S. citizen. We're talking only about the student who's applying for financial aid. Okay, so in a circumstance where the student is a U.S. citizen, say they were born here, and they have a parent or parents that were not, that student will qualify to submit the FAFSA. All right, they can qualify for aid just like anybody else. Okay, they do have to graduate, so you have to graduate or complete your GED. Most students, that will happen for most of our students here. You have to be enrolled in an eligible degree or certificate program. So many programs, including things like trade and technical schools, junior colleges, and things like that, will qualify. Okay, so when we're talking about financial aid, we're talking about most schools that when students take a class after high school or pursue a degree will be completing. Okay, there's very few that won't qualify. A couple examples would be like for-profit institutions. You might have noticed in the news. There's certain, I forget the name of the university, but there's a for-profit institution that they've been getting shut down kind of left and right, and for being kind of scandalous. But you do have to have a valid social security number, and that's very important. Okay, students, you need to know this, all right, but you need to also protect it. Males, you do have to be registered for the selective service. If you're not familiar with selective for service, this is what they go to in case there was a need for some sort of military draft. This is a requirement. So males, you do have to do this to qualify for financial aid. And so if you do not, there's a good chance you will not qualify for financial aid. So generally speaking, most people just agree and do it. But you have to think about that for yourself and have a conversation. I'm not going to tell you what to do or not do, but if you like money from the government, this is what they say they need from you. And then you have to make satisfactory academic progress. And typically what that means is that you're enrolled half-time or greater. So like at a typical university, say for example, like Sierra College, they take 30 units typically in a year to kind of progress through their program. And so that would mean you would take 15 units a year to be half-time. Okay, so that's usually what they would consider half-time, because you usually would complete about 30 units over the course of 2 semesters. All right, so those are some big things. So what are we using to calculate this? I'm not going to go into math. I don't even understand the math fully myself, okay, but I'm going to give you the basics of what they do when you submit the information through the FAFSA. So one of the biggest things that they're actually going to look at, and what the FAFSA application actually does, all this work is really to get this slide, okay, and get the information from this slide to the universities, okay? They are going to be calculating what's called your EFC, expected family contribution, all right? And what that means is, we are going to be, like I said, parents and families, you're going to be at some level on the hook for paying for university. All right, and so what they are doing is they're plugging this through a lot of economic information and things like that, and determining how much do they think, based on the number of people in your family, the eligible assets that you might have, and your annual income, how much do they think your family should reasonably contribute every year for your student to attend college? Okay, so that's the EFC. That number can go from 0 to basically a lot. Okay, so ultimately, if you have a lot, good chances you're not going to get a ton of need-based aid. Doesn't mean you might not get merit-based aid, okay, but need-based is going to, the lower the FAFSA, the more need-based aid you probably will qualify for. All right. This number, COA, or cost of attendance, is published by all colleges. All right, so if you Googled Stanford cost of attendance, or if you Googled Sierra College cost of attendance, or COA, they do that. They might also call it the cost of the net price calculator is another one that they use. Okay, what this does is this takes a look at how much college costs for a student to be able to attend. All right, so they break down tuition, room and board, reasonable living expenses and stuff. And basically they say your financial need, in this banner at the bottom of the screen, they say your financial need is essentially what it costs to go to school minus your EFC. And that difference, the financial need, is how much the college and in partnership with the government and things like that are going to try, that's an important word, try to meet to help you offset the cost of school. Okay, and we'll show you a couple examples at the end of this that maybe some of them will meet it, others won't. Okay, and that's kind of where this decision-making process sometimes gets harder. We kind of have a hard time in the fall working on applications and making some decisions there, but I honestly think sometimes the harder decisions come later in the school year when you get some answers back from the colleges, but then you get to compare the financial aid offers and determine which one's going to be fiscally responsible for you to now attend. Okay, so that's the whole thing. Financial need is a big number that the colleges really need to determine. So here's a few factors that influence the EFC calculation itself. Okay, so whether the student is an independent or a dependent student, I'll give you a secret. Almost all of our students at North Tahoe High School every single year are dependent students. Okay, so before you kind of go, striking down the road to emancipate your minor because they might get more money for college, generally speaking, emancipation is one hard and very impossible to do generally, and usually doesn't matter for financial aid. Okay, so that dependency really makes that influence on the EFC. Yes, if a student is independent for some odd reason, generally they do have some more aid pots of money available to them. But overall, we're talking about the income. Okay, that's probably the number one thing. Okay, income of both student and parents. So students, if you work, they're going to ask how much money you earned in the last year. Okay, especially if you filed taxes, but they will ask you if you earned $20 over the summer. All right, so if you earn money, they also expect you, the student, to actually have some level of contribution. All right, but mainly they're focusing on the parent, and that's kind of one thing to think about. They're going to ask about any savings. Okay, they're going to ask about some assets. Generally, usually retirement funds are sheltered, as is the family home. But if you have, say, a second home or a rental income or things like that, often those things are not protected from this calculations. Okay, so it's really going to be savings accounts, some sheltered financial kind of like money management type accounts, retirement type accounts, and then your family home or business potentially. Okay, one thing that I don't do generally is if you have a very complex financial aid situation, I would encourage you to speak with a financial professional about this, because I can give you the information, I can help you through the process, and I can give you some general tips and tricks. But once you kind of start getting into rules, regulations, taxes, do I move this money around? I kind of back myself out of that conversation. I am not a financial aid professional. I'm not a financial advisor. And so I just want to give you that warning. Like, I'm happy to try to answer as many questions as I can, but sometimes I might just say, this is beyond, both my ethical kind of ability to respond to, but also kind of like my expertise. And so just kind of keep a heads up there. The last two actually are also very impactful in the EFC. So how many students are in college? So if you have, say, an older child that's already in college, having a second one come into that fold of going and being enrolled in college can change that EFC calculation pretty dramatically, as can family size. Okay. Let's keep on moving here. These are the things that are excluded from the federal calculations. So your family home, okay, if you happen to have a farm, that is excluded as well as the value in your retirement accounts, like I mentioned. So let's talk about the federal programs that are available. So the Pell Grant program, Okay, so this awards up to about $6,000. Okay, so basically this is free money again. So this is going to be money that's usually free money. You're not going to get a check for this amount. It's usually just taken off of your total cost of college. So it's basically, think of it like a discount. Okay, so your federal Pell discount is about $6,000, and it is based on financial need. Okay, and whether or not you kind of are attending full-time or part-time. Okay. Another thing that's important about Pell Grant, and this is most important for students who potentially attend a junior college, because not all places in California, but in some places, say like Southern California, it is not uncommon for students to maybe take classes at 2 different junior colleges. There might be a college in either direction. And so ultimately what a student might do to get the best set of classes is maybe take a handful of classes at this one and a handful of classes at the other one. And an important note is that you can't do that with this program. Okay, but this is a need-based program. Okay, not everyone will qualify for this. Some of these other programs, the FSEOG, work study, are also part of the federal programs. And the good and bad news, I guess, is there's really nothing you can or need to do for these other than do the FAFSA. Okay, so there's nothing like, the good news is like there's really nothing other than completing the applications that you have to do to qualify. Okay, you either made the money or you didn't. And we'll talk about what money we're talking about. But generally speaking, you can't go back and change it. You can't really go, qualify it for it by being nice or doing anything else. It's really about, you just have to go through the process. And then if you qualify, awesome, you get some of the money that you might need. But if you don't, it's just something that you have to kind of find other pools of money potentially. So the other federal programs are going to be some of their loan programs. And again, loans are usually the word that people don't like to hear in relation to college. And understandably so. I went to graduate school. I'm still paying off loans, okay, but I think they were worth it. I wish they were less, but that's the way it goes sometimes. There's differing opinions on cost of college and free college and whatnot. Whatever your standpoint is, I think for vast majority of families, these loans really can help make school a reality. All right, because sometimes it's hard to pay for school. Okay, depending on, especially what I find is usually the middle group is actually some of the more impacted in the world of financial aids. So you make too much money to qualify for, say, some of the aids and the aid and stuff like that that's need based and indicated for some of the lower income brackets, but you don't make enough money to just pay for it outright. Right, so kind of that middle class area is a tough spot to be sometimes, and usually where I have those conversations about the overall cost and loans. But the 3 primary loans that you'll see are these are provided directly from the government through the school, typically. But you'll find the word direct means that this is the government that's actually funding this. And so if you need to take out loans, there is some strategy with that. Okay, and I'll kind of look at that at our breakdown of the different awards later. But the direct subsidize. So subsidize is a key word that means the government will pay your interest while you're in school. And that's important. Okay, so if you take out a loan at $5,000, you stay in school for 4 years, and then you graduate. For about 6 to 9 months after you graduate, typically, that direct subsidized loan will still be $5,000. Excuse me. However, if you take out a direct unsubsidized loan, the second one on there, that unsubsidized loan means that the day that you take out that loan, whatever the interest rate is, which the other nice thing about these loans is they do have a federally capped interest rate, meaning they're not going to necessarily be higher than that. All right, so it's going to be a much better interest rate than you'll find, say, through Chase Bank, a lot better. Okay, so, but that unsubsidized one means that your interest starts accruing over that time. So that $5,000 loan might be a $5,700 loan by the time you graduate or something. Okay, and the other one down there is the federal plus loan. Plus means this is a loan that the parent or guardian actually takes out. Okay, so these first 2 are loans in the name of the student. Okay, the student is ultimately the one responsible. The federal plus loan is a parent loan that actually is taken out in the name of the parent, and it adds some complicating factors in that many times, like the parent would have to qualify by their credit and things like that. So that's something that you just need to be aware of. There are some limits, so kind of good and bad news, I guess, as well. A lot of good and bad news usually about financial aid. The good and bad news is that there are limits, so that's the good typically, because the government says, we shouldn't be giving 18-year-old students $50,000 in loans a year, things like that, and so they actually limit how much money they give out. All right, so you can kind of see an example here on the screen. And the main difference between these two are if the parent can qualify for a plus loan or not based on their income levels, and also their credit. Okay, so you can kind of see here that is roughly student can take out about $5,000 a year in loans from the government itself. So that's just an important fact, and what you'll see on the awards package is that you might have something called a gap later on. All right, so let's keep on cruising because we're going to get to the state programs here. So in California specifically, okay, so those are the federal programs that we're going to be looking out for. In California, there are a few things that we're going to want to kind of like pay extra close attention to that help make school in California significantly more reasonable. All right. The downside of this, again, plus and minus always, the downside of this is you have to go to one of these schools that are in California. All right. You cannot bring these Cal grants and different awards that are funded by the state of California to a non-California school. That makes sense. So in California, you can use these at, say, a private school, public institution, or things like that. But you can't take this money and go to Indiana. All right, so that's a big benefit of attending school. When I get to some of the tips and tricks I would suggest you think about, California schools are generally kind of expensive sometimes. So even sometimes with some of these different aid programs, other states could actually end up being about the same or even less. So if you went, sometimes if you look at, say, Montana State or something like that, a lot of times they're very comparable even for out-of-state students. So just because you hear the word out-of-state and look at that, it's not always the case. Okay, but here are a couple, 3 major programs. The Cal Grant is a big one. And again, there's nothing necessarily special that you have to do to qualify for a Cal Grant after filling out your FAFSA. Okay, but there are some qualifying factors. For example, at the top of the screen, you see that Cal Grant A has a 3.0 GPA requirement. And it's a little bit complicated GPA calculation, but we submit GPAs for all seniors every year. It actually is just happening right about now, okay, for their past experiences. And it's very similar to the UC and CSU GPA calculations if you're familiar with that. Okay, it throws out 9th grade, for example, only looks at A through G approved courses and such. Okay, but ultimately you have to have that GPA. The C has a 2.0 GPA, all right, but you can kind of see kind of how it works. And generally, when we're looking at the different GPA types, what they're going to do, again, you're not going to get a check for a certain amount of money, okay? They're going to discount the overall cost, okay? They're going to basically, add more, kind of that in that calculation of cost of attendance minus financial aid equals, or minus expected family contribution equals your total cost of attendance, or your financial needs, sorry. What they're doing is they're changing a little bit in that kind of final calculation of what that looks like. So your overall financial contributions you have to make would be less, okay? So if you're curious about these, again, there's, benefit is you don't really have to do a whole lot. Middle class scholarship, it depends on your financial situation. Okay, and I think I have a breakdown of that here in a second. So when you apply for your your Cal Grant, okay, so in your senior year, just like I said, as part of your FAFSA, this is when you're going to do it. And a reminder that, I don't know if I actually wrote on a slide or not, but a reminder about financial aid. And an important note, because it's easy to look at financial aid and be like, oh, look, it says we have to pay $10,000 for school. We can do that, no problem. But what a lot of people don't realize is this is a 4 to 5 year commitment. Financial aid is done annually, okay? Meaning you'll fill out the FAFSA every year, starting in October, that a student is in college, okay? It does get a lot easier after your first year. Usually it's just updating some information, but it is something that students have to remember to do to qualify for these same programs, okay? The other big thing about applying for the Cal Grant is at the bottom down here. Let me get myself out of the screen. And that's an important deadline. So this is a California deadline. If you're filling out the FAFSA, what you'll see is it opens October 1st, which as of this recording is tomorrow. All right. And so you can't actually fill out the FAFSA today. You'll be starting to fill it out. You can start tomorrow. All right. And so that's what you're going to do. And I'll have a couple tips for that too in a second. But in California, students and families are going to want to make sure that application is submitted, fully submitted and processed by March 2nd, meaning you should not be hitting submit necessarily on March 2nd. Okay, there's sometimes errors and issues and things like that. My suggested timeline for financial aid, and this applies for FAFSA, California Dream Act, things like that, is aim for around Thanksgiving or the end of like sometime in December. Sooner is often better, but that's a good target date. While it is complex and intimidating, the actual process of completing the FAFSA really is not hard if you have all the information. Okay, so it's complicated, it's detail oriented, but it's not like actually difficult, if that makes any sense. So you know, when we show you that in a couple weeks, I'll kind of walk you through. Typically when I've done it in the past, you know, when I'm making up and typing stuff in, it only takes me about 45 minutes. Probably less time, definitely less time than we'll spend on this session today. So there is a website that you can use to track Cal Grant information. Okay, once you've submitted a little later this year, I would say maybe in the new year, it's a good time to start accessing it because it will start updating you and saying, here's what we're missing. It'll also tell you if you qualified and what you qualified for in your Cal Grant. Okay, this becomes more important as you start getting your award letters back. All right. So it just helps make sure that you know exactly what is going on with some of this California state aid. So there is some California Promise programs, and this is primarily at the junior college system. And so the junior colleges around California have committed to increasing access and reducing costs. Junior college is actually pretty inexpensive as it, you know, already for a unit. So most classes at a junior college are about 3 to 4 units, and you pay by the unit. So every unit at a junior college is $46 as of right now. Okay, and so, you know, most students for a year, which is about 30 units or so, will expect to pay about $1,500 in tuition. Okay, so if you are looking at a junior college, which I definitely encourage all seniors to consider, there's a lot of reasons why students might look at a junior college, from the cost benefits of it to you know, some of the access, or maybe, you know, maybe just it's a different path that you want to think about. There's lots of great opportunities there, but it definitely can help save money in a couple different kind of avenues, especially if you stay close to home. All right, so it doesn't really save money if you say move to Santa Barbara from up here, but if you went to Sierra College, because at the bottom you see you still have to fund your housing and living expenses. All right, and so that $1,500, that's great. Most families be like, yeah, I can do that. Student can work in the summer and make that easy and save that up to pay their tuition. You know, they have programs. Look up the Promise program, but the biggest thing about paying for, say, junior college is often your living expenses. Okay, between $10,000 and $15,000 a year typically. Okay, and you'll find less money available to potentially even pay for that sometimes. So that's why there's so many junior colleges. I think there's 114 now in California, is because they're designed that you can go locally to one and live even at home if you could. Okay, let's keep on moving on. So this has a lot of information, and I'm going to highlight it for you. So again, we talked about the federal student aid, so the FAFSA program. Okay, one note, you're going to be completing the 2022-2023 application. It's kind of confusing, okay, because it's kind of a year in advance. Okay, but what it's talking about is your first year of college. Okay, you're going to be a freshman in college, and that they're using this to calculate your cost for attending school in 2022 to 2023. Okay, and that doesn't matter if you're going to take 6 months off, you still will do this, and it will apply to the winter term or whatever else. Okay, so it's that whole kind of academic calendar year, usually June to June. Again, most state aids make their awards based on FAFSA data. California does. And then the tax year. So this is an important one too. The tax year that you're going to be submitting and using They used to use prior year. Now they're using something called prior year. So the tax year for the 2022-23 FAFSA submission is actually going to be your 2020 taxes. Okay, a couple notes on that. I don't know about you, but 2020 was an odd year for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Okay, and so sometimes people were like, man, the 2020 year was great for my financial situation. Others were like, that devastated our financial situation. So whatever it is, that's going to be the year that you will be using. All right, there's no way to be like, well, I want to use this year, I want to use the year before. Like, you're going to use that. You know, if you had a really great 2020 financially for some reason, and then maybe less so the next year, you're still going to plug in 2021 the following year and things like that. And there are a few ways that you can actually reach out to the colleges, and they have something called professional judgment to look at it and make decisions based on any changes. But that's just an important thing. So you do, both parents and their students, if the student filed taxes, you're going to want your hands on the 2020 returns. So try to start digging that up and trying to make sure you have all that kind of readily available once we kind of get going on this a little bit more. There's something called the Middle Class Scholarship. This is going to be at our CSU and UC systems in California. Okay, and it's determined, and it's kind of a sliding scale system. But basically, you know, you'll receive a percentage of the system-wide fees. All right, and so that can be actually a room and board as well. All right, but they will, that scholarship will kind of potentially offset between 10 and 40% of those fees. So clearly, if you make $190,000 a year, you know, you're probably going to be closer to the 10% versus maybe the 40%. Okay. Again, part of the FAFSA, you don't have to do anything extra, but you do have to attend one of the UCs or CSUs. There's also another one at the UC system called the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan or Scholarship, and that can also cover fees with scholarships and grants. Okay. And that's mainly if your family makes an income of less than $80,000. Okay. Again, no separate application. You just have to submit that FAFSA or DREAM Act by the March 2nd deadline. Students, you're going to get tired of us saying March 2nd. So just write it on your calendar, get it done early, and you'll get going. So a couple tips for filling out the FAFSA itself. Okay. Again, reminder that when you're filling out the FAFSA, okay, and there's two applications. You kind of maybe heard me talking about the CADAA or the California DREAM Act. Okay, there's two separate applications, and it's a one or the other situation. Okay, to file the FAFSA, remember we talked about this already. You must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen and have that Social Security number. All right. If you do not, there is still a path to receive financial aid. However, it's not going to be at the federal level. Okay. Unfortunately, the federal government at this time does not recognize non-citizens in the world of financial aid. Okay, so you can't actually fill out the FAFSA if the student is not a citizen. However, in the state of California does recognize your status as a learner, and they have created a separate application that you can qualify for all the state-based aid. So you'll miss out on things like Pell Grant and work study, but you can still qualify for in-state tuition. You can still qualify for the Cal Grants, for the Blue and Gold Opportunity Programs, all those different things that we just got done talking about. Students without citizenship can still qualify for those things and will complete a slightly different application called the California DREAM Act. Much of the same information is requested of students and their family, but it's a different portal. So you have to know which one you're doing, and it's not you're going to do both. You're going to do one or the other. I would say the majority of our students are going to do the FAFSA, but there's always a handful of students every year that are going to do the California DREAM Act. So it's just important to know which one's which. Again, very important, the parent is not the one that we're talking about in this. If the student is a citizen, the parent is not, you will fill out the FAFSA. Okay. If the parent's a citizen and the student is not, you will not fill out the FAFSA and you'll do the California DREAM Act. Okay, so it's just an important thing to know. This is a quick look at what the California DREAM Act application website looks like. It's from a couple years ago, so it might look slightly different, but last I checked, it looks pretty similar, and you'll just click on the button here that says start filling out the fill out the application itself. And then here's the FAFSA. I just took a screenshot of this today. They're working on some changes and things like that. So you can see down here on the screen that that they are updating it to the 2022-2023 FAFSA, which will open up, like I said, tomorrow. Okay. On the FAFSA website, there's also some information that you can find about deadlines. If you're applying out of state, this is particularly important, okay, because different states could have different deadlines. And what you'll probably find, I apologize, I've been talking a lot and my throat's rather raw all day. But March 2nd, for example, I pulled in California here. What you'll find is that other states most typically have as soon as possible as basically what they're listed. And that's pretty much the guideline. Is it makes the best sense as soon as you are feasibly able to submit a FAFSA to do so. All right, don't wait. And with the changes a couple years ago to some of what they need in terms of tax information, everybody should hypothetically have their taxes filed and returned and have all that information now with the year that they're using for that. Okay, so I want to make sure that you guys look at that. But if you're applying out of state, it's worth it to double check. And this is typically on, if you just scroll down this last slide, if you scroll down, that's usually where this page is looking at. So here's a couple things that you need to kind of keep your hands on. So again, we're talking about, we need your social security number. This is not something you want to guess on, students. All right. Students and parents need it. In the circumstance where a student has a social and a parent doesn't, generally they'll enter zeros and they'll leave it blank, and they'll continue on with it there. And it changes slightly what happens, but generally if a parent also has a social security number, they'll be entering that too. You'll need your hands on the prior 2020 years federal income tax returns, any W-2s, and any other records of money. Okay, so bank statements and investment records are typically going to be needed. You're not going to generally be submitting those anywhere, but you'll need to reference them for some of the questions in terms of, it might ask like, what is your balance of your savings account at this moment, things like that. Any untaxed income. This next bullet is actually really important, and this is something you can actually do now. Okay, both the student and the parent need to get what's called an FSA ID. FSA stands for Federal Student Aid, okay, and then ID, identification. So you need this ID that you'll create. This is a very important document, the very important login information, and so you can actually do that. I think is it on here? It might be up here underneath one of these things on this screenshot. I forget exactly where they had it land, but students will also be creating this. And another thing that I need to just throw this out there, because I'm guessing mostly parents will watch this. You need to have your students watch this, because like I said, all these loans, all this information, it's going in the student's name. They need to understand what this looks like, and they are actually the ones that are completing this application. Parents, do not complete this application for your child. Why? Because they're going to do this every year that they're in college. Okay, you are part of the process. They need information from you. They need you. You're going to have questions about you as you go through this. However, when it's saying you, when it's talking about you, it's talking about the student. Okay, I would say about 75% of this process is related to the student, not to you as the parent. Only about 25% is actually about you and your income. Okay, and so the student needs to, do not start a FAFSA. Another issue that comes up is that multiple people will think, I'm going to be proactive and start my FAFSA, and then you have multiple FAFSA accounts going all at the same time. Make the student run the show, meaning the student will click the Start Here button. The student will be the one typing in all the information. Feel free to help them. Feel free to sit with them, but the student should be the person completing this process. Okay, this is not for you as the secretary, mom or dad to do. Okay, this is for the student. So I want to make that very, very clear. Talked about the FSA ID. This is something, treat it like your social. Don't, because when someone can log in, they can access a lot of this sensitive information on the FAFSA system. So you do want to make sure that you keep this somewhere safe. Keep your login information kind of like you would in a bank account or something like that. But this is also what you'll use to sign the FAFSA at the very, very end. This is what the FAFSA creation site looks like. So it's going to ask you for a username and password. Just like with everything, it's going to ask you for this super complicated password that's probably hard to remember. Make sure that you keep it somewhere safe. Kind of recovering it can be a little bit of a pain. The other thing that's very, very helpful that I think, contrary to most, especially government agencies, but many companies is I think the FAFSA Help section and their support system is actually very good. Okay. They've gone through and spent a lot of time refining it and providing resources and actually looking at what families and students are actually kind of coming up against as they're filling this out, and basically providing pretty good resources. Like on the page, it's, it'll just talk about getting started. What are the FAFSA ID if you're a parent, things like that. So, I mean, realistically, it is very robust. The other thing that they do a good job of is having support people on staff to answer phone calls. The thing I actually like to do is use the chat feature. I'm kind of one of those guys. I don't want to talk to someone. I want to kind of like multitask. But the chat feature I found very helpful. And sometimes when I have questions, that's what I'll do with a student as well. Okay, so you can kind of see that over on the right side of this screen is you can email them, you can call them, and they have pretty extended hours. All right, so like they're open to 11 p.m. Eastern time, so most times are Eastern time. So just know that, and generally it's better to ask a question than to put something in and guess. Okay, so do your due diligence and kind of try to do that. The other piece that I would encourage families to do, not everybody's going to be able to do this. Certain financial situations are going to potentially be more likely to have this as an opportunity, but I would say the good portion of students will be able to do this. Okay, there's a tool in there, and you'll get there probably about halfway through, but there's an option to say use the IRS data retrieval tool or DRT. Okay, and what that does is it has you log on to an IRS website, which is totally safe, so feel comfortable in doing that. But you'll basically plug in your information, usually social, that kind of stuff, and it will automatically transfer the information from your filed tax return into the FAFSA for you. So it literally skips a good portion of the entire process. This probably saves you a good 20 minutes of time and kind of guesswork. So it's super nice in that sense. But here's the other thing that it does for you that if you can do this, I would highly suggest that you do, is there's also a process. Think about a tax audit. Okay, IRS can come and audit and make sure that, because when you submit your taxes, right, you're self-reporting. You're also self-reporting this on the FAFSA. Okay, but they do audit. So they call it something different. It's called verification. Okay, the federal financial aid folks, they verify about 1/3 of all applicants every year. Okay, and what that means is they're going to say, hey, you told us you made this much money. Prove it. Show us the money. Okay, send us all your documents, and we're going to make sure that it all matches up. What you do by also doing this data retrieval tool is in almost all circumstances, it bypasses the verification process. They just verified it. They got it straight from the government. All right, and so you actually can save some of that headache later on of having to go through that kind of pseudo audit and make sure that you're getting through that process. So of course there are special circumstances, and I feel like following this 2 months of COVID or so, we're going to have special circumstances for a couple years following this for sure, given the dynamics in income and living situations and things like that. So medical bills, whatever it might be. Okay. So special circumstances are something that maybe cannot be reported on the FAFSA. It might be a circumstance that doesn't get captured by the information you're being asked for. It might be something that has changed. Okay, so remember they're asking for, say, 2020 taxes. Maybe you lost your job in 2021, so it looks like you made a bunch of money, but really you don't even have an income source right now. Those are special circumstances. You're not going to put $0 in if you don't have an income now, if you made money that year. But what you do is you submit the information as requested and accurately, and then you would contact the individual schools at each college, and they will then, again, go through this process called professional judgment, and they might ask for some documentation, but they might, they have the ability to change basically the information that this FAFSA spits out to potentially qualify you for different programs. Okay, so some examples you can see at the bottom of the screen. So like employment status is probably the most common one. Medical expenses, if there was a divorce or something, unusual dependent care expenses, so different things that fall underneath that, or if like a parent has disappeared and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that could come up with this. Okay, like I said, a lot more of this year. One thing to think about with regards to special circumstances, and just kind of probably later on in the process, is I think if you do some searching on the internet about financial aid and kind of making the most of your financial aid circumstances, I think unfortunate flavor that kind of comes through in some of those websites and tools and resources is that they kind of treat this process kind of like a negotiation. Okay. For example, like sometimes you'll hear people like, well, we're going to call them and say, well, we're thinking about going to this rival school if you don't give us this much money. And that is something that you should absolutely not do. 100% don't do that. Okay. Do not call and try to game the system. That's not what this is for. The financial aid professionals, they have a heart. They want to help, but they are not car salesmen. They're not going to haggle. They're not going to negotiate. They will try to do what they can to help make sure that you are getting all of the aid that you're qualified for, but they're not going to give you a discount just because you said I'm going to this other school or I'm considering these different schools. Like, it's not that kind of process. Okay. And so ultimately the best thing to do is be upfront from the get-go. That way they know and have all the information, but just know that if there's special things that do come up, make sure that you reach out and talk to them. At the end of this whole process of filling out the FAFSA, which again in part 2, we'll kind of walk through and give you an example of this. You're going to get some information, and this is an important page to kind of print as a PDF and keep your hands on. All right. Confirmation number, that's always helpful just in case there's any issues like you said you submitted your FAFSA, we didn't get it. It's like, well, yep, here's my confirmation number at 10/28/2010 at 4 in the afternoon. Okay. You have this data release number, and this is something that maybe you might be asked for if you call in to the line. So like if you need some help support, they might actually ask you for that number, or the college potentially. They will actually estimate your EFC. So you can see over here, this estimate for this particular family was $4,443. Okay, that's that EFC. So usually EFC is what most families can think about as like, this is what I'm going to have to pay kind of from the starting place. You'll get a formal EFC determination in a couple weeks, typically after your submission is processed. Okay, and then it kind of estimates a little bit about what you might be eligible for. Again, total estimates. Don't go like sell the house for this. Okay, and then looking at information about some of the federally reported graduation rates, transfer rates, and so on. Okay, keeping in mind these are usually reported on 6-year averages for graduation rates. Again, in a couple of weeks, you'll get a student aid report. That's a kind of a more formal version of that last screen that kind of has your actual EFC with the information you submitted, and then all the colleges that you listed on your FAFSA, you will list colleges that you're applying to. There's no special need to like order them in a certain way. The one at the top does not mean it's your favorite. Like, just do it alphabetically if you care. Like, just put it on. It really doesn't matter. Don't stress about that. No one cares. Okay. The colleges will get something called the ISIR, Institutional Student Information Record. And so that's kind of like a more detailed EFC that they'll get, usually about 2 weeks after you submit your FAFSA and it's processed. And then they go to work once you've been admitted to actually create your financial aid award letters. And so those come out at varying times throughout the spring typically. Okay. Sometimes you might actually get additional documentation requests from the college itself. So that's an important piece. Once you're admitted, you'll get access to a portal. So keeping up with both your admissions kind of process as well as your financial aid process. And sometimes they're not connected. So you might have to be checking 2 different places. All right. So all that fun information, lots of information. So hang with me for just another few minutes. I want to show you the end results and kind of what we do when we evaluate a result and a letter. All right. So here's one example, and I've got several examples. This one isn't quite as clear, but I'm going to kind of talk you through a key thing. And there's another few that are kind of more formatted, like maybe a letter you might see. This might be more something that you see on a computer screen that kind of looks like this. Okay, number one is make sure that they have your name right. Make sure that they're giving you the right letter and the right information. I've not really noticed that happen too often, but it's something always to make sure of. Okay. Also, the other things that you want to check is that all the information is accurate. So like, are they kind of accounting for having you living on campus? Are they considering you an in-state student? Okay, all those things will change potentially the amount of money you qualify for. Okay, again, they're going to estimate your cost of attendance. Excuse me. Some of them will actually break it down even more than this. So like, this is an overall cost of attendance, which probably includes things like housing, room and board, tuition, miscellaneous expenses. Okay, other ones will probably break it down even further. So this school says it's going to cost a student $18,055 to come to school, over the 2 years. This is the annual amount. All right. And so this expected family contribution is 0, meaning this family, likely, there's certain circumstances that might automatically zero somebody, but more typically they're just of lower income. And so they might have 0. And so their need is this full amount. Okay. And so this school has packaged, they qualified for this Pell Grant, okay, $57.75. A Hope Scholarship, okay, and it talks about this is a school-based institutional award, okay, so this is something that you'll see too, kind of a merit-based scholarship of about $6,700, and then they package you, and this is part of the overall package to help meet your total need of 2 loans, subsidized and unsubsidized, and the total amount, okay. They happen to break it down by 2 terms, okay, and then the total. And then you'll see down here, they added it all up, and this number matches this. Congratulations, the student has 0 unmet need, or gap is what they often call it, okay? And so that's ultimately what we would love to see. We do not want any gaps, all right? So what this student might look at doing is potentially saying, okay, well, maybe I worked in the summertime, and potentially I earned $2,000. So this accept or not accept column, these things, this financial aid that you're offered is not something that you have to do anything with. You can choose what you take and what you don't take, and at certain amounts. So say, for example, this particular student decided, definitely want the free money, want the scholarship. I'll take the subsidized loan, but it turns out I don't need the $2,000. I really only need $1,000 of this unsubsidized loan. So they can actually go through, and typically on the computer, you'll plug in, assert how much you'd like to accept and then agree. And when you hit accept, usually it's going to ask you for additional information and things like that. But one tip that I have for the seniors doing this is when you get your financial aid award letter, don't just quickly go through and hit yes or no. This is a conversation that you need to think about and have with your family, because sometimes when you hit no, that money is going to get allocated elsewhere if you don't kind of jump on it right away. And you just want to make sure that you are very clear on what exactly you're signing up for. Okay, so that's one example. Let's look at another one. So this is another one. This is more like something you might get in the mail. All right, and so they'll talk about, read through all this information. And so what they're saying is they ended up breaking down this cost of attendance more. All right, so they said tuition and fees, $8,000, room and board, $5,000, books, they'll plug in there, transportation, kind of those miscellaneous types expenses. All right, so total cost of attendance per year is $15,650. Okay, over here, they're saying the expected family contribution at EFC, the student should be submitting $1,000, and the parent should be submitting $3,500 for a total of $4,500. Okay, so they take this total cost of attendance minus the EFC, and then that need would be what, $11,150 or so. Okay, and so what they're doing down here is now they're going to break down this award package. Okay, so they're saying federal Pell Grant, free money, $4,500, about $4,000. This supplemental grant, $1,000. State grant, love it. Federal work study, this is something that students might choose to take or not. And then you have the loans. Okay, so you have subsidized. Usually I would start, you kind of work your way usually down the loan list. So start with this until you, if that's all you need, great. If not, you can take this unsubsidized loan out. And lastly, would probably be this Parent Plus loan eligibility, and that's $2,500. Okay, they ended up packaging the student, and they consider loans to be meeting your need, just so you know. Okay, so when they say we've met, your total award is this, they are including the total loan amount. So that's almost, that's almost $8,000 or so in loans. Okay, and so just consider that when you're looking at it. Let's look at another one. So this is another one. All right, okay, they kind of talk, again, read through this, make sure you're not applying as a graduate student, that's listing you like a dependent, that everything is matching what you expect it to. This student's cost of attendance is $5,500, pretty high. This might be a good private school example. Okay, and so they broke it down and kind of explained, tuition's fairly high. So this student, what you can see here is they broke it down by awards. So they have 3 different levels, and so they have the different free money opportunities up here at the top. All right, so this student received a presidential scholarship. All right, so for a total of $20,000. That's a merit-based aid, most likely, that this private institution decided to award, maybe based on their grades or something like that. A Pell Grant of $12,000. One thing you notice that we don't see on here is your EFC. They're not listing that on this particular example. And then you see this opportunity grant for $1,000. Okay, so that total grant, and then you have a state scholarship. Total grant is probably about $23,000 or $24,000 or so. Then they also have the work study for $3,000, and then your different loans. Okay, Perkins loans kind of fall in very similar kind of categories as, say, a Stafford loan as well. But their total aid is $34,000. Okay, and this is an example that we have what's called a gap. All right, so this number, so if we take a look, this number, oh, let me come back over here. Working on the wrong screen over here. This number here, this 55,000, is different than what you're getting, even with the loans. Okay, so that's almost a $20,000 difference. Okay, and that's what's called a gap. So that gap is where students and families kind of get themselves in a little bit of trouble. And that's why it's important to apply broadly, because not every school is going to meet your need. All right, and so it's hard to predict what that's actually going to look like in this phase of the process. So you want to apply diversely so that you have different results. Okay, but ultimately that's where you see these gap scenarios tend to be the horror stories you kind of hear about on the news. So those are the times when students are on the news saying, I took out $250,000 in student loans for my 4-year college history degree. Generally speaking, and I don't use this word harsh, crassly, but those people are stupid. I mean, realistically speaking, like, these people have very little financial sense. All right, they were given some bad advice or made some bad decisions financially. All right, it'd be kind of similar to going and getting a payday loan and then going and buying your new Corvette with very little income. All right, it's just bad decision making. Okay, so these people are generally not really thinking 2 steps ahead, and so most people that have loans are not in that circumstance. So I think media always kind of blows everything out of proportion. I think they blow that out of proportion. Clearly, student loans can be a problem and should be less, but generally people are not leaving undergraduate school with $250,000 bills or loan bills unless they're dumb. So you have to know what your return on your investment is going to be. The student could go and take out $30,000 with these loans packaged to go to the school per year and leave with that high level amount. But realistically, you have to look at that as a family. Is that worth it? Is it worth it to do that? All right. And so that's a hard conversation, because sometimes that's your favorite school or your student's favorite school, and you have to have that real money conversation. Like, if you're going to go study history, like, you're probably going to need a graduate school degree, things like that. Like, this is just a start. And then what's the income kind of return on that particular degree or program, or the purpose of attending this particular expensive institution? Okay. So that's another one that I always kind of like to make sure I draw attention to, because it's a tough conversation, and sometimes this is where students get their dreams dashed. Is when the financial aid package just doesn't come through. And that's where I like to have students have multiple options and opportunities, including junior college, which can actually save money. Maybe this doesn't work for 4 years. Maybe this might work for 2 years for this particular student, and they do a transfer program after 2 years at a junior college, for example. Some estimate of costs. So this kind of breaks down kind of a rough idea. This is kind of a dated, so I'll have to remove that. I do want to call attention, and this is probably later on in the process, but you can also kind of like look at this as a research tool as well. This is available on my counseling website underneath the College and Career Counseling tab at the top. The link's here at the bottom, but if you go to the website underneath counseling supports or something like that towards the top, there's a link that says College and Career Counseling. Just click on it, and this is one of the buttons that you'll see is the college cost comparison tool. This is locked down for only students. But what it does is this, and as you go through, this can actually create a lot of comparison tools. Is what you'll do is you can plug in all of the different financial aid offers that you get over time. And what it will do is automatically, if you kind of just plug in the numbers where it tells you to, it will calculate basically what's your total cost of attendance, what's your 4-year cost of attendance. Okay, so again, extrapolating what this looks like over 4 years. How much grants and scholarships 401k you're going to be getting, and then your total financial aid package per year. So how much money is coming in and how much money is going to go out to the institution, and then calculate your remaining gap. So you can actually plug it in for each of your schools and get a single at a glance cost, like, okay, so we got into these different programs. What's the overall kind of over under on attending school here? All right. So a couple last things before we wrap up. So we are going to have, like I said, part 2 of this workshop when we'll kind of work our way through together the financial aid application called the FAFSA. I've scheduled that tentatively right now for October 9th or October 19th. Please make sure you mark that in your calendar. I'll send out another invite, probably attached to the recording of this. That'll be at 2:30, kind of same time frame, same bat channel, FAFSA, or on Facebook and YouTube. And then we'll talk about some of the important components of completing that. And I'll use probably a combination of some screenshots and then some live demos, depending on kind of what we're looking at. A couple other, just reminders on key dates that are coming up for this particular cycle. So again, tomorrow, as of this recording, October 1st, 2021, is when the 2022-23 FAFSA opens up for completion. So students can start tomorrow if they wanted to. But I would, again, set a goal. Okay. Like I said, October 19th will be the walkthrough of the FAFSA. So make sure that's on your calendar. December 2021, like I said, is a pretty good target date for making sure that your FAFSA or your California DREAM Act is done and submitted. All right. Early February, like I mentioned, is when our local scholarship application is typically available for students to start working on. And typically that's usually due at the end of March. So students have about 2 months typically to fill it out. And there are some work that students have to do. They'll have to write essays, get some recommendation letters and stuff like that. It is something that all seniors should complete. Okay. It is well worth your time. It blows my mind when students don't submit it. Literally every year we have some scholarships we literally can't give away because not enough students submitted it. And they didn't, some of them have very specific, say, criteria that we know students would have met if they would have submitted it. And sometimes it's thousands of dollars. March 2nd, 2022 is the California FAFSA priority deadline in California. If you miss that date, you are throwing away a large pot of money. All right. Doesn't mean you can't submit your FAFSA and get some aid. Like it says below that, June 30th, 2022 is the actual final deadline to submit your FAFSA or the California DREAM Act. But in California, I mean, you're throwing away tens of thousands of dollars, most likely, depending on what program you're applying to. Okay, so I mean, it's big money. So you definitely need to make sure, and don't wait until, again, March 2nd to submit. Get it done early because sometimes there's corrections or things like that that have to be done, and sometimes that's something that they won't consider after March 2nd. And then lastly, remember that FAFSA is a annual thing. This is something that you, the student, are going to be completing every year as you go through college. Again, it gets easier, but you can't forget to do it. October, like you roll into college for a month and congratulations, you're filling out the FAFSA again. Okay. Usually it's really just updating your tax information primarily. Okay. All the other stuff kind of saves. You just log back in, but it's something that you should put on your calendar to do every fall that you're going to be in college, and that includes graduate school. All right. So just recall that. Okay. We walked through some of those examples, but I want to just take a second and just remind you that I'm here to help you. This is a complicated process. There's many times that I don't know the answer either. Okay, so we'll ask questions together. I'll help direct you either to an answer or to someone who knows an answer. But I'll be your partner in this process. But please ask. You don't have to be ashamed about like anything. Like sometimes financial situations, things like that, people are worried about. I've seen a lot of different circumstances. Nothing usually shocks me. So just please do come ask. I'm happy to help any way I can. I'm happy to also review things with you and kind of look through and make sure if I see any glaring errors or things like that. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. If any questions came up from watching this, you can shoot me an email. We will be, again, if you're watching this in the fall, we'll be having those senior meetings. If you haven't booked yours yet, please go online to the website and book your post-secondary planning meeting for seniors. And we'll hopefully sit down and talk about some of the goals and plans your senior has in place for this upcoming school year. As a final reminder, parents, you are stepping into the back seat on this. I kind of want to make sure I reiterate that. Students are the ones completing this application. You can hound them a little bit, you can help them, you can support them, but please do not steal that epiphany from them. Help them make sure that they're doing this on their own. Okay. don't just step in and be their, their personal assistant through this process. I know they're busy and they got a lot of stuff to worry about, a lot of stuff on their plate, but really, it really hurts them in the long run. Okay, so please don't make it easier short term to make the problem bigger down the road. So please do ask questions. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time this afternoon, and we'll see you next time, October 19th. Bye-bye.